I feel like a lot of people have gotten their idea of what Middle-earth is and what the people who live in Middle-earth is from the Peter Jackson films, whether it's Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. How did you go about balancing that with Rings of Power, sort of honoring it but doing your own thing?
I'd read the books, I went to those films, and the trilogy was beautiful, and Gandalf, and so much of it was walked out of those books. But we didn't have that for this series, and JD and Patrick definitely wanted something that shifted away and suggested this earlier time. So we started by looking at, referring to the Third Age and then referring back to the First Age. We've got sort of 3 ages here, so that it made sense to sort of look at the whole story arc, and then out of that became sort of the language that we approached for the Second Age. But also, we all know we end up in the Third Age. So it gives you some place to sort of, look at the story arcs, and some are bigger than others. We have the elves.
This was going to be my backhand way of asking about Sword in the Shipwright.
You start then. I'll just wait.
Because that is another big figure that will be coming into season 2. So I wanted to know how you were kind of conceptualizing. Most people don't even know who that is, I don't think, unless you're big like Tolkien nerds. But did you have any sort of...
Actually, no, at the beginning, no one knew anything. So we were sort of working off that. Don't you? I love that too. So it's all instinct. A lot of works like that. Because of the way it was set up, and scripts were only handed out certain amount, but we did know what the rules of the characters were, and I think in some ways just supporting that allowed things to happen, and our job was to support the actors in those moments, and that defined a lot of our work.
This is a show about jewelry, so tell me about the jewelry.
I said to someone the other day, I said, I'm easy, and someone said, no, Kate, you request pearls. But it comes from there's the jewelry and the rings that is obviously the main part of the world, but there's all the supporting elements too. All Tolkien's work and reference to the characters, it's obsessed with jewelry. You look at the elves in Valinor and the vanity, and everywhere you read there's talk of jewelry and discussion about this, but also referring to the elements. He talks about his elves being born on shores of pearl, and he's not necessarily meaning that in a literal way, but it's always talking about ways to reflect the light and all of those qualities. So I think we approached it in a very organic way to relate more to the First and Second Age feeling that we were wanting to create. So it has a sort of rawer quality to it. But there's jewelry everywhere, woven into clothes. And some of it's just cast, some of it's not real. So
don't charge my buzz on that.
But we did put real rhinestones and pearls into Galadriel's chainmail. We did. Yeah.
Oh, let's talk about Galadriel's outfits, because I think she has such an interesting sort of costume journey over the course of the show.
Yeah, not just beautiful,
but functional too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was something JD and Patrick and Bayona wanted. They, a much more physical approach to her character, obviously, and one we see in battle. But it was how do we sort of keep a little bit of those elements, like the chainmail itself. It was a great opportunity in the Northern Waste to sort of, dress her, they wanted a warrior feeling, but to still sort of hark back to the world of Valinor and the jewel and that. And so we created a chainmail that wasn't yet mithril or any of those things, but we sort of worked on that. I said a word, didn't I? Moving on.
It's okay. We'll ignore it.
We know this in any history, right? So this is not script specific. But, it's trying to sort of find those things that make it a unique language that they would come up with, but also suggest age and time past. And the same with Gil-galad, and all those particular elves have been there in the First Age. So you've got to reference that world. And it was quite full on when you read some of the descriptions of that.
We have female dwarves.
I know.
In Rings of Power, which is amazing, I think. But how did you approach adding like a more feminine perspective into that culture?
We did many concepts that included all kinds of lengths of physicalities, beards, how much hair, how much not. But the main thing, starting with Disa, was sort of came from her characterization more than anything, and supporting that. But sort of, how do we still create the world of scale? These are humanoid. They're not humans. They're not your local Vikings down the road. And dwarves have their own. There's so much richness, and this whole allusion to stone. How do we find a new way into that language with stone and jewels and this golden age of dwarves? And we sort of looked at the physicality having a softness to it, but also a strength. So we use materialities in that way. Sort of the women sort of became an idea of water over the stone of men, so to speak. And Disa's eyes were reflecting the gold. Tolkien talks a lot about the dwarves reflecting the light of the fire in their eyes and their god Hawley. So it's sort of trying to sort of pull all of that back in really, and looking a lot at the Nibelung and Brunhilde and all those references that he had back to the Scandinavian culture.
This is so nerdy. I love it.
I am quite nerdy on all of that stuff. I grew up with Wagner's Ring Cycle and stuff. So I
was a medievalist in college. I got you.
Yeah.
Did you have a favorite sort of race to work on their designs?
I think it was actually the dwarves, because they represented such a rich culture when you got to know them. And when we worked with the visual effects team, Jason and Ron and their team building the world of Khazad-dûm, we had to serve a lot of extra sets for them, so we came up with dwarven priests, and then there were the gardening dwarves, all these things that Gimli talks about in Khazad-dûm before it becomes Moria. So there was this, and you learn about the dwarves and their keeping of secrets and all their ancient rituals, and Durin versus Durin, and the long beard. So there's lots and lots of things that came up in the research that sort of allowed us to explore them, and different characters. Dwarves become the most amazing characters to design, really. So cool. Yeah, and how do we do that without having a huge, one of my briefs was not to bog down production with a huge amount of prosthetic and fat suit making. So we went for character more than anything, and tried to, that was partly the casting. We created things that felt dwarvish in their jewelry, back to the jewelry, we had gold ears and things that could help on a realistic way of getting through deadlines, timelines and that, but also be part of the culture and answer it in that way.
All right, I can't finish
Gold
this
feet.
without
Gold
asking about Halbrand. Did you know going into it who he really was, and did you try to put any Easter eggs or anything into his sort of style evolution?
Well, I being a bit of a talking nerd, we'd all go we didn't know for a long time. Nobody knew, and everyone went around asking. It was like one of those games where you sit around with a label on your head, a yellow label, going, "Am I this person?" But no.
Am I the Lord of Darkness?
Yeah. I think everyone said that at one point. And then you'd go in and go, well, does this mean this? And sometimes it was important and sometimes it wasn't. At the end of the day, we ended up supporting the character that they were depicting in terms of Halbrand at that moment, because that's how you allow that to happen. So.
I was surprised, and I suspect everyone else was too. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for sitting down and talking to us today.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.